Okay.
Ta-da! Now, Mindy,
It's
I
funny
can't
when
see
you,
you anymore, so
oh, well, we can hear each other, and that's all that counts. So Ashley and I, because we have a conversation with Will Wilson and also with Edward Curtis, we thought it would be fun to see what could be sparked through conversations between two curators. And so how all of this really creates a dialogue. And with that, we will start with the two figures in question, at least initially. So Will Wilson is a Diné photographer. He spent his formative years on Navajo Nation, was born in San Francisco, studied photography at the University of New Mexico, and has made a career of really giving voice to the sitters that he focuses on and photographs. Directly from Will Wilson, I will just give you a quick quote. I propose to create a body of photographic inquiry that will stimulate a critical dialogue and reflection around the historical and contemporary photographic exchange as it pertains to Native Americans. So what he's really doing is working with the sitters of his photographs to have and engage them in their own self-fashioning. So in a photographic sitting, he might say, bring things with you that you would like to be recorded with, wear whatever you would like to wear, and then they talk through it, and then the actual sitting and then the finished photograph is a collaboration between the photographer and the sitter. In a bit of a response, and really what he is doing is responding to Edward Curtis. Edward Curtis is a bit of a contradictory figure. In his own telling, he risked life and limb to document Native Americans. This was his view of them, certainly, and a cultural view from the turn of the 20th century. You know, on one hand, he is a bit arrogant, rolls into Indigenous territories with a trunk full of masks and regalia from other places, and sets the scene. He photographed and recreated sacred moments and retouched images, etc. Now, I don't want to dismiss him as just an arrogant white guy who does this, because the value in the archive of the people and places is astonishing. And so he was able to do so much with his work. It's undeniably impressive. It's 20 volumes. So let's just jump in to show you what we've done or did at Crystal Bridges, and then Ashley can also talk about how this exhibition has had a life well beyond Bentonville, Arkansas. So this was the title panel at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art back in 2018 when this was first presented. Crystal Bridges owns a full set of the Edward Curtis photogravures. That's over 700 of them. And so we worked directly with Will to borrow some pieces from him, and then also we hosted him at Crystal Bridges for a workshop where he took photographs of Indigenous peoples in and around Northwest Arkansas. Next, Ashley. So throughout it's a smaller gallery for us, and we placed both of the photography by Will Wilson and the photography by Edward Curtis directly in conversation. Visitors could tell the difference. There was a different finish. Will Wilson's photographs are more kind of gray tones, and Edward Curtis definitely has that sepia tone. And with these, the intent of even the labels on the photographs was to tell more about the sitters. So where Edward Curtis would simply label an individual as a Mandan or an Assiniboine or in some romantic fashion, maybe even a disrespectful title, we really worked to dig through the archive and find the stories of the individuals that were photographed. Give them some voice back to them. Ashley, next. So you'll see as we show some of the images here, these are titles and certainly placing you within time. So this is 1908, 1909, and again, Edward Curtis is traveling around. The end result of these warm tones, just intense views, beautiful detail of the pieces themselves. But it ends up in a big volume, and unfortunately, we don't have a lot of names. So we know Fog in the Morning, an Absaroka person there on your left, and the Rush Gatherer. So not all of the names were recorded, and there have been many really worthwhile projects to talk with descendants of different tribes to regain and re-identify some of the individual people. Next. So oftentimes, and even at Crystal Bridges, we have used the Edward Curtis images in galleries that might have a painting like John McStanley's Buffalo Hunt. And notice the dates. There is 75 years separating the difference between John McStanley, who did go to Montana, met Blackfeet people, and then portrayed paintings very much in an academic sense. You know, this is essentially a French painting with a stallion and a rider rearing up, got lots of good action compared to Edward Curtis's Bow River. He's really hearkening back to an imagined past for these people. By 1926, the reality, and certainly in 1855, Stanley is probably a little more true to form, but he is influenced by artistic styles and other academic training. And Edward Curtis is influenced by a time in America where there is a lot of concern about the so-called vanishing race and the future of Native people. Next. But they live in very different times. You know, other comparisons are easy to make with Carl Bodmer, equally almost 100 years earlier than Edward Curtis there in the center. And Bodmer too goes on an adventure in the West and documents Native peoples as he meets them, names many of them. But this image of Bodmer, for example, has been circulated for decades by the time Edward Curtis uses a photograph to do much of the similar thing. But I'm just calling attention here really to timing and that difference between the 19th century and the early 20th century. Or is it actually that different, these vantage points? And next. What makes more sense, perhaps, is to put Edward Curtis within a context of, in this case, we're looking at the Southwest, of modern artists from New York who are going to the Southwest to find inspiration. Marsden Hartley even says, I'm an American discovering America when he goes to the Southwest because he can't go abroad, it's World War I. And so Marsden Hartley's New Mexico #2, 1919. This is the same time, again, that Edward Curtis is traveling, or Stuart Davis and his view of New Mexico. So he goes to New Mexico and makes this still life with a map, with that saw in there, but very abstract and geometric. These are Edward Curtis's peers. This is the stylistic kind of popular styles in art at the time. So just to give that kind of comparison. And next. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't plug a current project that I'm working on that is really meant to bring more voice and different perspectives about the American West to the foreground. So that center image of the potter is a woman who we know her name. Her name is Nampeo. So Curtis was taking pictures again and kind of simplifying maybe the titles to, in this case, just the function of what Nampeo is doing. She's making there. And I'm showing you one of her vessels, this beautiful, really incredible jar on your right-hand screen. currently in the Indian Arts Research Center's collection. And then also just a funny, a kind of farce of a print by John Sloan on the left. And Sloan is satirizing the tourists who come down to Santa Fe, and you can see her with her big silver belt and her, you know, like little hat and her cargo pants, purchasing this black pot from the Indigenous figures on the right-hand side of the pot. And he's really making fun of the tourist trade and belittling these kinds of engagements and interactions. But all of these views and advantages in the exhibition that I'm organizing at Crystal Bridges called Knowing the West, we're really prioritizing the makers. How do you help Indigenous people tell their own story, make space for that, and bring voice to some of the images that have been really made kind of generic? So next. Again, it's important for me, and a slideshow I can do this, put a photographer in context. And so again, Edward Curtis, and here in conversation with Alfred Stieglitz. And these were the some of the photographic styles popular in New York, were really at the avant-garde in New York in the early part of the 20th century. So Stieglitz thinking of, you know, industrialization or these abstractions in what he called the equivalence. These are peers, Edward Curtis and Alfred Stieglitz, and certainly knew of one another. Have the same patrons even. And back to thinking about what would it take to really give agency and voice to Indigenous artists at the same time. So in the Southwest, there's a whole school of art by the early 20th century, even before 1930. And this is some of the artwork that's coming out of the San Ildefonso Pueblo and some of the art schools in Santa Fe. So just brought that in again for a little more context. And this, just to give you a sense of the way consumers would have purchased and also consumed these volumes of works. So this is the full volume of all, oh gosh, were there 20 volumes in the series. Curtis also made a feature-length film. He got seed money from J.P. Morgan, so he was really hooked in, and had a lot of great patronage. Let's see, the volumes contain more than 2,200 original photographs, nearly 4,000 pages of text. So it is no small feat what Curtis pulled off. And also, but if you look really closely, I don't know, Ashley, can you move your cursor over? I hope everyone can see some of the doctored aspects of the photographs. Here are two men. They have an alarm clock, and right there in the center, because these were modern people with modern conveniences. In fact, you know, Curtis is driving around in a car to go visit everyone. But at the final prints, he would doctor things like that were sort of like, oh, whoops, we forgot to take off the watch, or we forgot to cover the clock. So next. Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit more about Will Wilson?
Absolutely. You know, I think something that's really important to realize with the Curtis images is that there's an aspect of those images that are inherently ingrained in the public's understanding of what they think Indigenous people used to be. And that was a very it was part of the process that, you know, Curtis went out there wanting to capture what he, you know, thought of as a vanishing race that's referred to as a vanishing race in the introduction by Theodore Roosevelt, who is, you know, in some ways lamenting that the native peoples are disappearing from the Americas, while also actively participating in that disappearance through policies of assimilation and reservations. And so there's something really lovely and documentary about the way people think of the Curtis works, but they're absolutely, you know, constructed realities that they would bring in objects from the Smithsonian for the sitters to wear and really are constructing this. And so when Will Wilson is creating his photographs, he's doing it with all of that in the back of his mind. And he's really trying to problematize that practice through the active autonomy that he allows his sitters. Here's two great examples of Stormy Weber, who is a two-spirit artist based in, I believe, the Pacific Northwest, and then Swil Kaneem, who is a violinist. These are contemporary people living a contemporary life, but they are also Indigenous, and both of those aspects are able to come through Will's photographs in a way that was never really allowed in the Curtis works and wasn't what the audience wanted to see. And so build upon that, I think what was really lovely with the presentation that happened at Crystal Bridges, and one that, you know, this was an exhibition that right when I began my work with Crystal Bridges, they were putting this show together. And there's that question of like, why are we still talking about Edward Curtis and Will Wilson? Like, why is this conversation still going on? And it's because those ideas of Indigenous people through Curtis's prints continue to really shape how a lot of people think of Native people. And so the presentation allowed for a conversation to happen between those two artists, but it also created a space to talk about the contemporary Indigenous people that live in the space that Crystal Bridges exists, to bring those voices and those images into the space. And here we have two examples of those with Sean Touton and Elena Pelete, who are Indigenous people living in this region, you know, living their lives as both Native people as well as American people. And the wonderful thing is that this project is, you know, part of Will's focus is building upon this project with more and more people, bringing in more representation. But our Crystal Bridges was able to not just have these images taken, but they added them to their collection. So there is a permanence that now it is not just the Edward Curtis's works that are in the collection, but also these pieces by Will. And I don't know if you have anything to add with that, Mindy, since I'm talking about your institution.
No, I think this is great. But you're reminding me, Ashley, about how important it is to not just talk about how, you know, Sean, for example, could come wearing a sport jacket and his glasses, which kind of darken in the light, which you can see that effect in the photograph, but also the methodology. So Will is very mindful of Edward Curtis, you know, coming into a community, taking the photographs, producing them for wealthy individuals who want to purchase the 20-volume set. And then what happens with the individuals who are the subjects? They probably don't even see that final image or the print or understand that they were bound into these volumes unless they were seeking it out. And so to be clear, what we own at Crystal Bridges is these are high quality and large scale prints of the original. So the original is, Will is also nodding to the photographic methods of the past, and he is taking tintypes. So these are photographs that are developed on the tin, and that original tintype, they're a little bit small, but they're really precious. They have a jewel type surface, goes to the sitter. So Sean is the owner of the original photograph. So he holds on to that. And as part of the agreement with Will, he gives Will the, you know, a scan of that image. And then that is what Will use to do a limited edition. And also that's what we then purchase. And so that agency, it's not just the agency in self-fashioning, but it's that ownership of the image is also with the sitter. So I think that's a kind of an important aspect of his artistic practice.
And then just because as curators, we would be remiss of, you know, making it seem like Will is the only Indigenous artist that is thinking about the legacy of Edward Curtis, I brought in 2 additional artists that are really reclaiming this concept of visual sovereignty, which is, the power over your image and what it presents to the outside world. One artist is Larry McNeil. He's a Tlingit and Nisga'a artist. He's based in Boise, Idaho, and he is a photographer. So in the same way that Will has taken up this medium that has been problematic for Indigenous people and is now using it to in some ways correct some of those problems, Larry is doing that same thing. He's also a lithographer. He really is doing a couple of different really interesting mediums. But this is a great image because there are a couple components of it that directly call out Edward Curtis. First, you have this great reproduction of one of Larry's lithographs, that it's a series of these comic book-like moments that have interactions between Tonto, this stereotypical Indigenous character that existed within the world of the Lone Ranger. He was the sidekick. He was thought to be sort of stupid and talked very stiltedly. And Tonto is having a very verbose conversation while punching Edward Curtis in the face. And he's calling out Edward Curtis's like native epistemology and the visual sovereignty that has been taken away from Native people. And so it's this great little comedic moment. And then in the middle here, you have a direct call out to an image from the Curtis portfolio. It was when Curtis was in Alaska, which is at the end of his career of capturing all of these images. And he took this image of, it was a holy man that was being presented in a very, what I would call, stereotypical sort of shamanic concept of Native people as being othered. And he has imposed upon that a white man's face. And the idea is that, for the image that Curtis took, the person in the regalia has a mask on. You have no idea who is underneath that mask. And Larry, being the comedian that he is like, wouldn't it have been hilarious if it was actually just some like white guy that was underneath that mask and we're just pretending that this is an image of an Indigenous person. And so there's those little moments of, some of it's tongue-in-cheek and some of it is literally punching Edward Curtis in the face, of calling out the issues with those images. And then another artist that did this is Jim Diné. He's an Ojibwe artist. He recently passed, unfortunately, but he likes creating these moments of envisioning Edward Curtis as a paparazzi, that Edward Curtis is tooling around, trying to capture these moments, and he's not really welcome. Nobody's super excited for him to be there. They're oftentimes running away from him. Sometimes Jim will picture Edward Curtis like peeking around a tree, a little bit of a peeping Tom type situation. And so calling out the falsity of the narrative of Curtis, really playing and having fun with this idea of like, why are we still talking about Edward Curtis when we're thinking about Indigenous representation? We want to represent ourselves and we are going to do it in the ways that we want to do it. And I don't know, Mindy, if you had some final thoughts with these two.
Well, of course I do. The other thing that I think is important about Will Wilson's work as well is the scale, so some being very large scale reproductions, and we do have a large scale reproduction of Terry Berry. And each of the sitters also actually presented their own title. So they were able to write out how they would like to be, titled. This is another archive. And I think as much as Jim and Larry are involving humor to kind of help people approach something that is really can be very traumatizing, this history and the archive. And so I think it's really important for museums to be helping to correct the archive, or at least enrich and complicate a pretty single-sided vision. And Jay Benham, it's just worth pointing out, this is a man who has dedicated many years of his life to being a museum educator here at Crystal Bridges. And so I think he was a little shy about seeing this image on the wall, but also very grateful. And so I think that's another thing that we're doing with making sure that the collections have more texture and ways in which to see Indigenous people, not just as artists, but also their presence really on the wall, and scale is such a part of that. So correcting the archive is something that we all need to commit to.
Okay, so this was a Crystal Bridges created show. It was created with the Crystal Bridges audience in mind. Why am I here is, sort of the second part of this journey. And I work for a foundation called Art Bridges. We are focused on expanding access of American art across the nation. We are a sister organization to Crystal Bridges, but even though we are a sister organization, we share a founder, we are separate entities. And where Crystal Bridges is a museum focused on presenting works for their local and visiting audiences, Art Bridges is really instead thinking in a much broader sense about expanding access and ensuring that important stories are being told through art and available across the nation. And this gives you an idea of just how much work we are doing in ensuring that that happens. And what is really exciting is that once the show at Crystal Bridges concluded, we were able to acquire 17 works from Will that were a part of that original show, acquire them into the Art Bridges collection, which is separate from the Crystal Bridges collection, and focused on sharing our collection in a very expansive way, and created an exhibition based off of that original show that would travel across the country and really ensure that Will's story is being told and is being prioritized as we are talking about visual sovereignty and expressions of Native identity through artistic expression. And the first place that it went to was in Denison, which is, oh gosh, I'm going to say the wrong state. It's either Wisconsin or Michigan. I apologize if there is anybody who's from there. But one of the things that we did is we changed the title. We really had long conversations with Will, and he enjoyed the show that was at Crystal Bridges. He really understood the reason that Crystal Bridges presented it in the way that it did. But he stated, I want to stop just being sort of Will Wilson and Edward Curtis always. I want it to move beyond just that conversation. I understand that that will always be a part of the dialogue, but I want it to expand beyond that. And so with each iteration of this show, it has expanded. It's become in conversation Will Wilson. It's really about Will, and we're simply using the work of Curtis, or we're even using other works from Will's body of work, other series, to allow him to tell a story about visual sovereignty and representation. And so I have just a couple examples of iterations of it. But this is a screenshot of our website that just talks about the fact that the show is incredibly popular. It is obvious that people are wanting to have these conversations. I think it is booked currently through at least 2026, which for an exhibition that started when Mindy in 2018, when it was presented at Crystal Bridges.
Yes, that is correct. Almost a decade on the road.
It's crazy. It's really something that when you talk about expanding access to American art, and I absolutely believe that Native art is just as much American art as any other American art that you might think of. For a show to be able to have a life like it does is really meaning that it is having an impact, that it is helping to hopefully change how people are thinking about these images that they just took to be representations of a people in the past, and instead starting to understand this continuum of existence and expression. So here is another, this is still the presentation at Denison, and you get to see these additional images that Will put into it that expand upon his thinking just about sort of cultural expression, but now also thinking about other issues that are happening within Indigenous communities, this one specifically with climate and the damage that has happened because of uranium mining, especially on the Navajo Nation. Some more images of it here. And then this was a presentation in Delaware where they actually brought in an additional image of Will that's not part of our collection. It's not part of the Crystal Bridges collection. It's such a great image. I really wanted this work when we were acquiring pieces for our collection, but unfortunately, all of the editions had sold, and so they borrowed it from a private collection. But it's Will sort of talking about this duality within himself, both as a Navajo man, but also thinking about this like cowboy and Indian dichotomy, and the fact that, you know, a lot of Native people are also farmers and cattlemen, and so that duality really comes through there, and it's such a great little it almost looks like Will is in conversation with himself, which I do think part of this process is about this continuing conversation that Will is having with himself. And then the great thing I think with Art Bridges traveling the show is that it's going to all of these different locations. It's allowing institutions that maybe do not have any Native art in their collection, or maybe they have historical art, but they've never been able to present contemporary Indigenous art. They, you know, are able to do things like create a land acknowledgement. They're able to not just present the work, but to also do some institutional work that's focused on undoing some of the problematic issues that continue because of colonization and because of the very state of the world that we live in. Here are some more images. And then I want to call out, because of how long this show is on the road, there are changes that happen over time that, because of the nature of the Edward Curtis works, we have to switch them out every couple of years. And that allows us to ensure that the exhibition changes, it evolves, it can stay relevant, even though these images are, you know, from the past. We can ensure that we can bring contemporary conversations into it. One great example is that with the newest switch out, one of the works that I chose to be a part of it was this image of John Abbott, who was an Osage man. And it seemed really fitting based off of the time period that the image was taken, and the at that time, the pending release of the film Killers of the Flower Moon, and that conversation of the Osage murders and how, you know, the government had structured the financial stewardship of not just Osage people, but many Indigenous people who they viewed as incapable of taking care of their own finances. And so the government would come in and would, you know, hire a guardian who was typically a local white person to help with those finances, and how, surprise, surprise, that created some major issues. And, you know, at the end of the day, an ongoing issue of colonization is that there is a desire and an idea that if you want something, you can take it, especially from the Indigenous communities, because that is your right as the colonizer. And so that opportunity to be able to update the show and to make it relevant to other things that are going on in the world is really something that I've appreciated as I've been able to see it continue and be presented in different spaces. Mindy, do you have any last comments or thoughts before our little ending video?
No, just that when you bring this up and you, again, look at the date and think of what is happening in the country, and especially the reign of terror is the 20s. So this is like, as all of this is happening, think of the things that Edward Curtis saw and was part of as a photographer in these specific places. It's astonishing when you really pull back the layers of the stories that can happen. And I'm grateful that we have his name, you know, in some of these records. That's sometimes what strikes me the most. And so I also think it's fitting for the video because of the connection to the Osage people.
Yes, exactly. So this last slide, it is a video about 4 minutes long. If you've seen it before, I hope you enjoy re-seeing it. If you haven't, you're going to be aware immediately why we are including it here. But we are happy to talk about it after the video concludes, and that's when we will open it up for Q&A. But please enjoy Smiling Indians by the 1491s.
This feeling Well, thanks to you both. That was such a great presentation, and I love that video. That was beautiful. So I appreciate you sharing it. Um, I have several questions of my own, but I really hope that our audience chimes in with some as well. And if you do have questions for our speakers, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A, and I will moderate. And once again, I'm Katie Malone, the Manager of Education here at the McClung Museum, in case you didn't see me in the beginning. So one of the things that really struck me, especially when you put up the comparison of photography that was made at Curtis's time, Mindy, this is maybe for you, but I think for both of you really, is that idea that when photography was invented, it was such a technological marvel. And a lot of photographers used it to document, futurism and the Industrial Revolution and other, kind of far-fetched technologies that were happening at that time. Yet Curtis did the opposite, right, with his photography. And even Will, in kind of, kind of creating this dialogue, this comparison is kind of using that retroactive of photography. And I wonder if you could speak to that and kind of push and pull of that use of technology by both Will himself, but also that historic context. It's so interesting. I hadn't thought of that before you showed it. So
Yeah, that's a great question, Katie. And somehow photography always gets this magical sheen around it, that it's documentary. Whereas, paintings, well, those can be dramatized and staged. And so Curtis is absolutely relying on the audience to understand that this is documentary, that this is truth. There's nothing about artistic, license. And even by the time he's used it, I mean, we also have to remember photography was invented around the 1830s. And so while it's still relatively new, it's very much new in an artistic sense. The documentary photography of the expeditions, they weren't intended as quote unquote art. They were intended to, lobby Congress to make national parks and find places to put railroads and, really kind of technical services. And it's interesting when art layers in, and Stieglitz is now, really a proponent of photography is art. And that's why he does those kind of abstract clouds, see how artistic this is. We're going to make it, sort of moody and abstract. And so it is a push and a pull in that using a media that is so tied to documentary, but yet being so artistic about it and kind of hiding that artistic part of it. And then we probably all still regularly forget photographs can be altered, although maybe not these days when now, AI is changing our whole world, and we have to, there has to be some reveals of like, this photograph has been faked through AI. Well, that's in some senses not very new. Photographs could be altered, but I like how Will nods to historic photographic methods by pulling that out and then like using it instead of everything being in opposition. It's genius, really, to say I'm going to use the technologies of more of the past. That was part of when he was at Crystal Bridges. We had to figure out where could we set up, because he had to take the photograph and then be right there in a dark room making it happen with all the chemicals. Well, we're an art museum. It's really hard to bring chemicals inside. You got to hope for a good day in November when he can go from the inside where the photograph is staged to the outside in a makeshift tent that is his dark room, to use his chemicals to, make it, what am I saying? Oh, develop. Yeah, that was the word I was looking for. Ashley, I don't know, would you add some thoughts? Because there's so many contemporary Indigenous artists that are using photography. There's an exhibition that just opened at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, all Indigenous photographers. And so this kind of countering these notions of images of Native people made by white artists, that images of Native people smiling because Curtis never had anyone smile, can and are being made by Indigenous artists. So
yeah, and I think what's so fascinating with Will's process is like he chooses to make it a complicated process. He doesn't have to do that. He's very much in other parts of his, production, manipulating photographs. He could sort of recreate this idea of a tintype without doing the entire tintype, chemical sort of magic behind the scenes. But when we were working through acquiring works, and I don't know, Mindy, if you remember this, like technology is still problematic. I think that he had his hard drive stolen when we were trying to acquire the works.
Yeah.
So he had to go back to those original tintypes, rephotograph them to produce the digital images. And so it's, even as the technology advances, there's still all of these things that can happen. And the fact that in the same way, the human part remains no matter how much the technology advances.
And speaking of that human part, one of the things I think is really beautiful about Will's choices is that he leaves his hands in the image. It's very clear that he's extremely skilled. And I've talked to, we have a local tintype artist here in Knoxville, and we talked about the process of development. And she said it's very, you can pull what they call a clean plate and make it, remove the hand from it, but he makes a lot of choices to kind of leave in that evidence of the process, which I think is, I kind of feel is probably really important to him. But I wonder if y'all could speak to that a little bit as well, about that choice to kind of maybe leave in some painterly qualities or leave in that, there's one, at least in our gallery space, that even has a little fingerprint, which is probably my favorite part of that photograph.
I love that. I think he sees value in the process, and they're definitely, like, this is not the first show of Will's work. There is an incredible show that was done at the Fred Jones Museum of Art, where they went and they found the families of the Oklahoma natives that had been photographed and photographed those families now, and also added additional community members. And there was a moment where a woman takes a photograph, and a face sort of appears in the fan that she is holding, and that is purely like happenstance. There is no digital manipulation going on there. And I think that you could probably ask, well, that's one of his favorite images of, like, how does this occur? And so that little bit of magic, that not stepping in too much, allowing true autonomy of the sitter in every sense of the word, and giving autonomy to the chemical process as well, is really something beautiful about it.
One other thing that we probably should have mentioned, especially when you mentioned technology, is that, and I don't know what the status of it is now, Ashley, but his, what did he call it? Like, there was
it's
an
talking
app.
tintypes. Yep. And he has his own like bespoke app now. He's figured it out.
Yeah. And so to hold up a device, and it scans just the image, so you don't have to have a separate QR code. And then that Stormy Daniels one, I remember that one being so powerful.
Stormy Weber, Mindy. Stormy Weber. You're thinking Annie Leibovitz right now.
I am. I'm on a different exhibition. But Stormy Weber recites a poem. And so you have Stormy's own words, and then the violinist plays 10 Little Indians, and then talks about that is a song of genocide, that all of these small kids are talking, like the 10 Little Indians, then it's 9 Little Indians, then it's 8 Little Indians. And so having a conversation with the sitter where they truly, kind of seem like they're coming to life. And I think that combination of such high tech, augmented reality with the tintypes makes it all the more powerful that it's like coming to talk to you.
Yeah, that the violinist playing is really, every time somebody scans that one, you can hear it kind of resonate through the space, and it's so powerful. It just gave me goosebumps thinking about it. So I want to ask you, obviously a little bit more of a curatorial question. So since this show has been touring for so long, since this has been gone through many iterations, I really liked how you talked about, making choices based upon, things that are cropping up in our pop culture and news, especially with the recent release of the Scorsese film about the Osage people based on the book by, I forget the author. But it must be really difficult to kind of keep the show fresh in a way that you find satisfying as curators of the exhibition, and especially, those initial decisions are so I know what it's like to curate an exhibition where you spend a lot of time making your choices, and do all the research, and it takes a significant amount of development. So can you speak a little bit more to how you maintain maintain your original intent and vision while keeping it going, and how that might inform, if it even does inform, the projects that you have running in the background, your project that you're working on right now, the project that you are going to be working on, in a month or two that you have on the docket, and how that kind of fits in with your workload, which I guess that's like 3 or 4 questions, but
No, I mean, it's a great question. I think it talks to the uniqueness of Art Bridges and what we do, because this is a new exhibition every single place it goes to. It does not look the same, I'm sure, at McClung that it did, at the Manello in Orlando. The audiences that are seeing it in those places are totally different audiences. And so to me, from a curatorial standpoint, I'm not feeling that like, oh my gosh, the show has been up for so long. It has done the work it needs to do. Like, it is time to retire it. It does a whole new thing every iteration. But I think there's also this excitement that I have, once it maybe reaches that 2026 point of going back to Will and saying, okay, we've talked to Curtis. We have presented this everywhere that could possibly want to present this to their audience. Now, what else do you want to say? We have works in our collection by Cindy Sherman. We have works by Deanne Arbus. Like, what does it mean to put Will in conversation with those artists? What does it mean to put him in conversation with Bruce Davidson or Lorraine O'Grady? Like, there is this possibility in the, or Stieglitz. I mean, oh my gosh, or like Alfred Stieglitz or Edward Steichen. Let's keep going. Let's do FSA. Like, let's bring all the people in. Edward Weston. There's so much possibility, and the conversation will evolve and will change, and the work and the sort of the thesis that Will has through the series doesn't change based off of what it's being put in conversation with. It simply expands upon that. And I think that from a curatorial standpoint, it's a really exciting thing to think about.
Yeah, I would say to add to that, and that is the magic of Art Bridges, and it reflects our relationship, Ashley and I, in that there is a level of trust and like truly collaboration with Will and with the institutions that present it. I can walk into one of those spaces and go, I might not have done it exactly that way, but I wouldn't have seen what just happened because of that presentation. And so I think that is the beauty of this kind of partnership and collaboration, is also the flexibility to be able to make something more kind of extensive or personalized from it, compared to an exhibition that's so like, this is the first thing you see, this is the second thing you see. And that happens too, but it's really refreshing to work on a project like this, to not have it. And for me, everything that goes before informs the current work. And so even if it's the simplest like shift of perspective to say the colonizer's perspective is not the final say, that will impact every single curatorial decision that I make. And as someone trained in pretty strictly American art history from a canonical standpoint, you don't understand how valuable it is to have someone tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you know, there are other ways of seeing this. And then for you to tap the next person on the shoulder and say, hey, did you know there are other ways of seeing this? And just how like exciting that is when you can just see that realization of like, oh my goodness, look at this, you know. So in conversation, Will Wilson, it's like Will Wilson ... with all of the viewers, with and speaking of Annie Leibovitz, I mean, that would be an amazing show. Actually, that's what we should do. So it's just very, it's like so, and this is the fun of curatorial work and collaboration, I think. It's like all the conversations. So. And
also, apologies to Denison. It's in Ohio. Mindy pointed it out. It's nowhere near where I thought it was. I need it on the record. I now know where Denison is.
That's all right. You were trying to remember on the fly. I'm sure people can forgive. I think that, I mean, we're running up against time, but what I think is most interesting, or not most interesting, but interesting about what you both just said is that there's this continued sense of co-ownership, right? Or maybe ownership isn't the right word there, but agency, where, you know, Will has the spirit of making sure that the sitter, they have full agency over how they're presented, how they're represented, you know, how they are. And I'm sure he even offers the chance to not have their photographs shown in certain ways if they want that. Right down to the title. But then the way you two talk about curating, you know, this exhibition, but I'm sure other exhibitions, is that idea that you create a balance between, you know, your, you know, probably ego and desires and interests, and that of the living artists that you're working with. And I know you don't only work with living artists, but I think that really makes for an interesting relationship, you know, because curators can sometimes be like, this is how I want, you know, I have been thinking about this for a long time. I've been doing all the things and I have all the scholarship behind me and I'm just ready to put it up. But that sense of kind of push and pull between that relationship. I don't think I have much of a question there, but I just want to ask you how you kind of came to that, where you find your balance within that kind of relationship building and how that manifests for you.
Well, I mean, I think for especially Indigenous art, which is where I started my career, and as an Indigenous person, I'm Cherokee Nation, you know, understanding that agency over how our work is presented has not existed. It is not part of, you know, the historical presentation. It wasn't even part of the modern presentation. Like being able to allow an Indigenous artist control over what they are giving to the public is really important. It's part of that visual sovereignty, but it's also part of just the sovereignty of tribal people and ensuring that some of those wrongs that were done within museum spaces are being addressed through this type of sort of reciprocal relationship instead.
Celebrate Ashley and myself, but I also think it is a particular curatorial practice that builds in that conversation. Quite frankly, it's where the field is going and should go, is this notion of community and being a facilitator more than a single author. And so that's, I think, also a really important way to think about it, is how much of our work is facilitation and making sure to uphold voices, but we have the important task of choosing what is there, and that we have to be beholden to a lot of people and voices in order to do that. So it's like listening as much as saying, hey, this is my dissertation. Do you want to hear it?
Nobody ever does.
No, the answer is never yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I asked that as much for my museum studies
Yeah.
students who I know are out there as I did for myself. And I really appreciate your beautiful answers and how generous you both have been. This has been such a great presentation and conversation. Thank you both for being here. And I want to thank our audience for humoring me for a little extra 5 minutes. I invite you all to, if you are local to the Knoxville area, to visit the McClung Museum. The exhibition In Conversation Will Wilson is up until December 2nd. And we thank Art Bridges for their generous support to make that presentation and this conversation possible. We will be inviting Mr. Wilson himself will be on our site on December 2nd. So if you want to hear directly from the person who created these beautiful photographs, you are invited to that. That will be an in-person conversation. Separately, we are presenting the film Imagine the Indian on this coming Friday. That will be an in-person screening, and the filmmakers will be on site as well. So if you're interested in a similar conversation to this about Indigenous representation, that's being presented by our local Native American Student Association here at the University of Tennessee. So I invite all of you to join us for that as well. And yeah, I thank all of you for being here, and thank you, Ashley and Mindy. I don't know if you have any final words before I close this out. Great.
No,
Well,
sounds good.
everyone have
Thank
a
you.
wonderful evening, and take good care.